Because it was the most grandest song you could have imagined entering a room to?
Because.
Yeah, is there a story, Rob?
I'm pretty sure my sister walked down. Did she walk down? I'm not sure if that or another song. Anyway, but my father, one of the things that he instilled in me is a love of music. And it's funny, I hadn't actually recognised that until I was walking across the sheep paddock talking to you the other day on the phone. That is actually, I love music like that because when my father hears it on the radio or has a CD playing, he turns it up and it irritates my mother. And we love it. Not that because it irritates mum, but so...
Wow. Beautiful. It's a beautiful segue into your early life, Rob, because many of us might not know. Rob's chairperson of our congregation. He was heading up the team that built this community space, has been very involved in the life and leadership of this community. And so many of you might feel like you know Rob, but you may not know too much about him. So Rob, where did things start for you? Are you born of this state even?
No, and I won't make the standard Tasmanian joke.
Okay.
But I was born in Hobart. My parents... And I had 3 siblings, so the 6 of us as a family lived in Hobart and in Queenstown, little mining community on the west coast of Tassie, as we grew up. Yeah.
What was Mum and Dad doing in that time?
So Mum's an occupational therapist and a cook, cleaner, pianist, encourager, and as Mum would say, overworked and underpaid. And Dad started... Dad came out of a life of poverty on a farm and became an electrician, and then became a teacher. And he was also in the Army Reserve for more than 40 years, as he was an officer in my childhood anyway.
Wow. Yeah. So Rob, reflecting on some of those early days at home, maybe up until you left, what 3 words would you use to describe your dad?
Hard-working, committed, and practical.
Okay, where did you see that? What sort of some few examples of a couple of those things?
So weekends and school holidays, as my father being a teacher, we would spend quite a lot of that time, well, it felt like a lot of it, at the school, helping him prepare workshops, as in he taught design technologies, and so, improving the facilities with free labour, or helping in the garden, or doing those kinds of things. Helping, when we lived in Queenstown, the minister was a minister of a number of churches and would have to drive between these churches on a Sunday morning, and the congregation built, and mainly my recollection anyway, led by Dad, effectively a unit in the church, in a corner of the church hall, so that the minister could stay there overnight, and so shower and toilet and bar and bedroom, and reclad the church hall because it was weatherboard, and kind of.
So already we're seeing some things, Rob. You've spoken love of music, and here we are. I just introduced you as someone who helped us build this build, not necessarily physically, but you're very much a part of the planning and leading. They're 2 things that you grew up with. That's the sort of things that Dad did. So any other ways... Oh, actually, I'll jump to this one, then I'll come back. Any other ways that you are your father's son? Is there any personality or temperament, Rob, that's... and anything too that you've perhaps sought to be different in or explore differently?
Certainly that committed to many different things.
Okay.
Both work and voluntarily. It's interesting. My father was away a lot with the Army Reserve, so the 2 weeks a year, and every Tuesday night, and a few weekends, and one weekend. What's the old ad? 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, and so that usually coincided with my sister's birthday, which used to irritate her. It would, and so Mum loves telling the stories of the irregular phone calls that she would even get to make to him, and of Robert has done this, and we've managed to fix the blown fuse, and we've managed to clean up, just all that kind of stuff. Dad loves the outdoors, and I love the outdoors, and so being in the bush in Tasmania is nearly a spiritual experience, I think. And even though, you know, that love of music, my father wasn't a musician. My father sang out of tune so that he didn't have to be in the school choir. He went to an all-boys school, and he was head of the Army Cadets, and you can just sort of see that, you know, not necessarily working to do both. But he really valued education. I mean, he was a teacher, but he really valued education, and so that was certainly instilled in us. And I guess I, you know, share those things. And so he's not musical, but he can sing, but doesn't do anything, but encouraged us in that. Politics is something where we're very quite different. It's quite funny. Joe will have a good laugh at this. So Mum and Dad met at a young Liberals convention. Yes. And they raised 4 very small L Liberals in terms of, Green and Labor voters. they were quite successful with that. So Dad's quite conservative with his politics. He reads the Weekend Australian and tells me about it every Sunday night, about something I need to read. And I'm not. I don't read the Weekend Australian. I have a more public faith, I think, than my father, but he is a very faithful man and very committed to the church. And I am very different physically from my father. So at 73, I think he's about 73, he is stronger and fitter than I have been or ever will be. He prided himself on beating everyone 30 years younger than him at a army PT, and he recently boasted that he had to stop doing as many chin-ups because otherwise he was going to have to replace his whole suit jacket collection because he was getting too big at the chest.
Wow. Rob, there's not a lot
I
of
don't
difference.
compare.
Yeah, let's encourage Rob. He's still in all right shape, isn't he? All right. Wow. Amazing, Rob. There's images there. We haven't even met your dad, but you've got a picture of him, haven't you? So, Rob, what about now, my friend? What about family now and life now? You're here clearly, just up the road from us here, but what's your story now?
So I have a wonderful wife, Jo, and 2 boys, Bryce and Reese. And I had some notes about that.
Yeah, doesn't quickly come to mind, which is something Rob's working on.
So I'm an engineer. Actually, I think my dad would have probably been an engineer, but that was never possible for him to be, really. And I lead a research team for the Department of Defence. And I love to volunteer at lots of things, and that I think is a common thing. So both here at the church, but also as a vocal coach and prop engineer for a local theatre company.
Sharing your eldership and a few other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
So what have you discovered, Rob, or what are you discovering about love? It's a bit of a segue, isn't it? Straight into the love, but through perhaps your time with your family, with having your boys and Joe, or what does love look like in your household? Now, I know your family's sitting right here, so it's not an opportunity to respond, guys, but what does that look like for you, Rob? What are you discovering?
That love is both a wonderful thing and it is hard. And it has to be really intentional. Maybe this is just me, but it just doesn't entirely come naturally to love people when it's hard and when it really takes effort. And I think love looks like an active interest in what's going on, and whatever that is that's going on. And as the boys are growing and hiding, it's actually about being what's interested in what their life is, not just expecting that they would be interested in what my life is. Wow. So that
very thoughtful. Everyone's a bit challenged, which is great, Robert. And in that God's love for you, Rob, I mean, you mentioned that faith was a part of home, and you grew up around church life and that. But what does the love of God increasingly looking like for you now? How's that maybe changed, or how would you describe it now for you?
God is a God of unconditional love and limitless love, and I think that's been, I guess, a part of my life since teenage years, and discovering that despite everything that I do and everything that I do, God is love, and God is loving me irrespective of the frail human condition, so to speak, and that is a great challenge, So what does that look like then for me to do the same, to love my family, and to love people in the community, and to love people at work, to love the guy who had never met any Christians, and he turns up at work, and to love him, to love the people who I disagree with at work. That's probably the most challenging, is the people who just do things differently. That's and to love in the circumstance, and so wherever it is, to love. So I guess I'm a big God is love person, and I'm not as much a God is here to smite you down kind of person.
Excellent. We'll quote you on that. And so, look, Rob, we're going to just finish with one final question. Do you have a final encouragement to us, or a scripture perhaps that has been a source of encouragement for you and continues to be?
So I think it's on our wall. Jo can correct me once Reese's finished having a conversation with her. I think is the 1 Corinthians 13, love is kind, love is patient. Is that on? That's on the entrance wall to our home. Yeah. So that was a reading at our wedding, and it's a great wedding reading. But what I think that it is more than about a husband and wife, and of course it is more about that. But it's to see it outside, to see it beyond that. So to see it as this is what love looks like in a family. Just because we shouldn't expect everyone just to go, oh yes, I know exactly what that is, because my head is a book. Let me read from the Message. Love never gives up. So this is 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 onwards. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut. Love doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others, isn't always me first, doesn't fly off the handle, doesn't keep score of the sins of others, doesn't revel when others grovel, takes pleasure in the flowering of the truth, puts up with anything, trusts God always, always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. And so, then what does that look like in a family? But then what does that look like across the aisle this morning? And I see Olga, and I think, that is Olga. Olga gave me some photos during the week of our kids, because Olga came and was grandma to our kids at school on Grandparents' Day. That is love. And that is love when her daughter Anne takes them to school, and one of the kids doesn't want to get out of the car because things haven't gone well that morning. And Anne dropping them at school means that Bob was probably away, Jo was probably dealing with something else, or maybe even been away herself. And it's just like, that's what love looks like. What does love look like in community? And then what does love look like for the people who we don't love? The world calls us not to love even. The people that the world despises, what does it look like to love them with that same love? And that challenges me, because I'm not saying I have any answers to that, but I think it's, God calls us to there and says, now that's what love is. And leaves us for us to go, okay. So what does that look like for me? Anyway, for us all.
Wonderful. Well, Robbie, you're a man full of passion and life. We really love you in our midst. And thank you particularly to Jo and the boys. Wayne's kids are a bit younger, so they really weren't too aware of what was happening here. I'm pretty sure you guys were, so thank you for your grace. Love your dad, all right? And can we just say thank you to Rob for sharing with us today, my friend. Bless your heart, buddy.
Thank you.
Awesome.